Welcome. Welcome to, I should start by apologising for the slightly world-weary tone of the title of the session. We still need to talk about commissioning. Last year we unveiled the inaugural industry-wide survey on the state of commissioning in the UK, which raised some pretty serious concerns. Cancelled meetings, indies starting production without green lights, ignored emails, rude behaviour. Our panel last year made some bold promises that things would get better, that we wouldn't be back here this year discussing the same issues. So we're going to have a look and see how much, what exactly has changed. We've commissioned a survey of the UK's top 100 indies. 83 of the 100 indies responded to the survey. That's up slightly on last year. Last year, 76. And just in case anyone is in any doubt, according to the Broadcast's survey of the independent sector, those 100 indies account for roughly 95% of all turnover in the UK. So we are talking about a pretty representative sample of the people who supply the people who you see on the stage. In order to try and avoid Groundhog Day, I'm going to try this year to kind of move some of the arguments on. I mean, we had a lot of I don't mean this pejoratively, righteous indignation last year. This year I want to try and drill down and see if we can actually get to some practical suggestions about how we might improve things. If you want to get involved, you can, anonymously or otherwise. You can use the app to feed in comments, questions and suggestions, and we will try to carve out some time. I know there were complaints last year that we didn't get to this, but we're going to try and carve some time out at the end of this session to take some of those questions and comments. So use the app or Twitter. So I'm going to introduce the panel, distinguished, obviously. Last year, we had, I'm not going to introduce them exactly in the audience here. Last year, but I'm just, for those of you who weren't here last year, I'll just remind you how the various members of the panel responded to last year's survey. Peter Fincham sat there most of the time fluttering his eyelashes and trying not to look smug at how well ITV had done. So we'll see whether he's, how you can rate his smugness factor this year. Stuart Murphy. Stuart was very upset that Sky hadn't come first. So we'll see whether, how he feels about this year's survey. I thought Stuart was very clever because his strategy was to get more upset than anyone else, even the people in the audience. He said, this is actually, I have to say at some point he's slightly reminding me of Claude Rains in Casablanca. I'm shocked. I'm shocked that gambling is taking place in this establishment. You're winning, sir.
Thank you.
Those of you who don't remember how Ben responded last year, that's probably because he wasn't here. Because Channel 5 took the view that they weren't going to take part last year, but we're very glad to have them.
Actually, that's not true. I simply didn't do it.
You weren't asked last year?
No, I was doing my controller session. It was my first controller session, okay. And they were back-to-back or even overlapped or whatever it was, anyway. And it was my decision not to do it.
Anyway, we're very glad to have you here this year.
Lovely to be here.
And Danny and Jay... And Danny and Jay, I think it's fair to say, probably came in for the toughest time last year, and they did make some serious commitments to try and improve things, and we'll be looking at those as we go through. So let's just start with a reminder of the overall slide from last year, and so this was last year. Because it was our first survey. We looked at whether broadcasters had improved or got worse in the previous 5 years. Now, I should make it clear, and this is for the benefit of the panel as much as for you guys. This is not about who is best. This is about who has improved or who had improved over those 5 years. Now, can we just move to the next slide? And which is now. So this is the commissioning. This is what has happened in the last 12 months. Now, you would expect, last year it would have been, you'd think it would have been challenging for ITV, having improved so much in the previous 5 years, to have improved again in the last 12 months, but they have. The important thing here is to look at the relative size. The key thing here is the relative size of the green box to the red box. If your green box is bigger than your red box, then you are doing better overall. If your red box is bigger than your green box, then you are doing worse. So, well, actually, the first thing to say, Ben, is actually it's probably just as well that you had a scheduling clash last year, because you seem to have done genuinely well in the last 12 months. You must be pretty pleased with that. You know that you know you seem to have genuinely improved in the last year.
I think I'm actually quite passionate about.
Done rather better than ITV, which is I don't know if you've ever had someone who did better than ITV.
It's one of the things I'm really hot on is getting back to people. So you don't waste their time. I've always been told a no is better than a maybe, and a maybe hangs on for months and months. It's one of the things I'm quite tough with the team about. You've got to get back to people. You've got to tell them where they stand and not waste people's time. I'm a great believer in that. So I'm glad to see that. Still room for improvement.
You're still not best. You're treading. I mean, I think
I'm shocked. I'm shocked. I'm just disgusted.
You're sort of. I mean, I think you. I'm not going to even ask Peter Fincham for a comment on this slide. Actually, we're going to. But Stuart, I mean, I would say to be fair, that's pretty evenly divided. You're sort of treading water, but that's presumably not ideal for you. You would have looked to have seen more of an improvement.
I would have liked to have not been a lot worse and a lot better at the same time. It would have been quite nice. But yeah, I mean, unlike some of the other broadcasters, only a third of the respondees had actually worked with Sky. So it's a bit like us asking people what are food in our restaurants like, and 2/3 of the respondees have given an opinion but haven't actually eaten there. So I take it with a slight pinch of salt, but yeah, I am disgusted and extremely upset. I would, obviously, joking apart, I would have liked to have had more improvement.
And Danny and Jay, I mean, look, things have got a lot worse in the previous 5 years. I mean, you must be pretty disappointed. Jay, I mean, you're down 39%, saying that 39% saying you've got a lot or a little worse, compared with only 27% that you've got better. I mean, you seem to be actually, rather than having made an improvement this year, you both seem to have gone backwards.
Well, I think that's a slight misinterpretation of this, actually. I think if you look at the slide before, where I think by anyone's reckoning it was a slightly bleak piece of reading for us last year, I think this is a vast improvement. And in terms of I know the latest survey shows that we're actually now scored second best overall. So I think it's been a year where all of the initiatives that we put in place last year are beginning to kick in. We're getting better at this. We haven't got as far as we want to get to, but I think we're going in the right direction, and I'm very, very encouraged to see that improvement.
Danny?
Well, I'm not satisfied with how we're doing, if I'm honest. I mean, I won't try and whitewash it. I've done quite a lot of work off the back of this, because I think this work's important. We've done our own survey to look at where the problems are and what's causing them. And the picture I'm seeing is that actually last year, in many of our genres, we've got a lot better. We're not perfect, but the feedback we've got in quite a detailed, granular piece of work off the back of this is that in drama, entertainment and comedy, we're actually doing a lot better in many, many ways. Not perfect. The area we're not doing well enough in, and that is dragging our scores down from the extra work done, is in certain areas of factual. And that's damaging us quite badly, and I've been really clear with those teams about what I'm expecting in the next 12 months.
That's something I want to come back to, which is about whether the generic nature of the survey is concealing specific problems.
Sure.
I think that would be a really good thing to talk about. We're going to go on in a moment to look at some of the more granular aspects of the survey, but first we're going to run a little bit of VT. We've just to get a sense of the flavour of both sides of this argument, commissioners and producers. Now, last year, it was suggested by Stuart Murphy that it was quite possible to identify some of the people.
Yeah, we don't work with them anymore.
We have slightly changed the form of this, and I challenge Stuart to identify any of these people in the VT. Can we run the first VT? Okay, we're going to start with the development process, and we're going to start with, and it was referenced a couple of times in there, the nightmare that is email. Shall we just put the next slide up, which is about response times? So here we have, we asked people about the speed of email responses, and then we asked about the quality of email responses. Now, clearly, the quality of an email response is a pretty subjective thing. The speed of email responses, on the other hand, is pretty empirical. So we asked people about whether they were responding to within a week, that is the green bar, within a month, or over a month. And I think, what I'd like to focus on here is and Danny, I think I'm going to come to you first here. According to this bar, 29% of people said that they did not get a response within a month to an email. Now, I suppose if you had a viewer complaining about a BBC programme and it took you more than a month to respond to the viewer's complaint, would you think that was satisfactory?
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but Alex, can I ask a question? Do we know what we mean by response here? Do you mean, thank you for your proposal, I'll get back to you? Is that a response? Or do you mean, thank you for your proposal, we've looked at it very carefully and this is what we think about it? Because there's quite a crucial difference, isn't there?
Yeah, I think we're talking about responses. I don't think we're necessarily talking about...
So just thank you for your proposal...
We're talking about a response. We're talking about getting a reply. Person.
Thanks for coming in first. Listen, I don't think it's good enough. I'm going to repeat it. I think in some areas, as I say, it's happening in more than others. But in some of those areas of factual in particular, there are a number of things that came out of that research we've done and the survey we've done. One was about speed of responses, not quick enough. In some areas of factual. One was about not enough quick no's. There was quite a lot around, and this is development point as well, around we're asking for too many versions of treatments before they go to a channel controller. So there were a whole range of issues that came up in that factual area, which I think are a factor in that. And what I've said to those teams and those people involved is, you can be the most creative people alive. If you can't manage your supplier relationships well enough, we won't get the best ideas, and I don't want to be working with you. Because you can't do that. You're not representing the BBC in the way I want you to, and you're not going to be bringing us the best ideas because you're not the best to work with. So it's really important to me that we don't tar everyone in my team with this brush, because a lot of people are doing really well on this and are doing great work. But if there are areas that we need to get better, I've been clear with those people that that's not good enough at this stage.
Well, can I ask all of you, or broaden this out, because clearly some of you are doing better than others, but there is a sort of, I think, broadly speaking, the pattern's the same here. Danny's point, it does seem to be that, one of the challenges with the survey is a generic survey. We're asking how many people have had, and what it doesn't do is identify. My suspicion is that, these figures in some of your broadcasters, in some of you cases, these figures are being skewed by some people who are just repeat offenders and recidivists. So I suppose my question is, if that's the case, why don't you, as anyone's going to step up, why don't you publicise, next year maybe we could have a discussion about it, why don't you publicise the individual email responses of individual commissioning editors or departments? Or even if that's a difficult thing to do and you don't want to humiliate people in public, why don't you do that internally? Why don't you actually drill down, or maybe you do, why don't you actually, as Danny says, identify those who are failing and do something about it?
We do, actually. It's one of the things that we put in place. I think we were one of the first broadcasters to talk about a timeline, and it was 21 days with the ambition of being shorter. And to make sure that was happening, we put in place precisely that, of monitoring it. And we had around 87% success rate. It's a pretty brutal thing. What it reveals is the areas where you're having problems. One thing I would say, and again, it gets more complex, is inevitably in our case, and I'd echo what Danny said, in some factual departments, particularly people who are pitched single documentaries, the volume is colossal. So often when you look at where it's running into difficulty, it can be partly genre related as well, but we are very mindful of that and are monitoring precisely that in terms of response time, so we can identify those people.
But
You could always index against volume, couldn't you? It's an interesting point. The only reason we haven't done it, partly we haven't thought about it, Alex, I think partly I don't want monitoring overload. I think partly it's a bit demoralising for a commissioning team, and you hope that stuff like this everyone listens to and you all collectively respond. I think there's probably an element, and this is an uncharacteristically generous thing for me to say, so brace yourself. There's probably a level of expectation, probably, about people feel a sense of ownership of the BBC and Channel 4, I suspect, Indies do, probably in a way they don't maybe for the other channels. Because, I feel actually physically sick saying this, so I'm so sorry. But, people feel they own the BBC, it's theirs, and similarly, same with Channel 4. If I can move on to be quite aggressive and nasty in the next half of this, that'd be great. But, so we might always come off slightly easier than those other two, maybe.
No, the other thing I was just going to add is I think the RE-comms thing just doesn't work, and it drives people mad on both sides of the fence, so we're going to get rid of that. And we've invested money this year in a new tool which we're going to call Pitch, which I hope will be available by the autumn, and we'll be able to take that around the indie community and in-house and show it works. It's essentially an app. It will work on your smartphone, on your tablet, or on a laptop or a main computer, and it will make it speedier, quicker, friendlier, and you'll be able to get a much better sense of where your idea is in the process. So emails is definitely a part we've got to do better, but we also hope the pitch thing is going to make a difference in the next year.
You want a meaningful email response, don't you? I mean, as Peter said, I'm sure we all have automated systems that just ping off a kind of, I've received it, we'll get back to you in 48 hours. But actually, you either want a meaningful response or a conversation, something that moves the creative discussion on, because potentially we could all up our marks brilliantly by just having a great bit of software.
But is there, you made the point about a level of expectation about BBC and Channel 4, and I think that may be right. And to turn that on its head, Peter, is part of this, part of the reason why ITV does well here, is it just you are more ruthless about the number of producers that you work with and the number of sort of emails that you will actually you have a smaller constituency, and actually one of and that therefore actually it's easier for your team because there are just fewer, there's just less traffic. It's just easier to deal with it.
I don't even know if that's true. I mean, I wouldn't know how to measure it. I mean, there's loads of traffic to our factual team, because there's always loads of traffic to factual teams. I always say about factual, and it's a very obvious point to make, that whereas in entertainment or drama, if you're ITV or BBC One, you command people's attention just because of the size of your budget. You're sort of slightly unignorable with a really big drama or a big entertainment show. That's not true with factual at all, where if you were to line up the different channels from the point of view, where's the best place to take a factual proposal, there's no necessary reason why ITV would come near the top of that list. There's many more channels commissioning factual, so therefore we have to try a bit harder. So I think there is something in the idea that we feel at ITV we have to try quite hard. I think the point Stuart's already made about people maybe are slightly more inclined to feel that sense of ownership of publicly owned organisations like Channel 4 or the BBC, and therefore maybe to expect sort of high standards. So there's probably something in that. I think it's complex. I'm sort of sitting here thinking, I think this is a useful thing to do. In other words, to sort of play us off against each other, and it's certainly nicer if we come out well from it. And of course, we're partly motivated by now. We will year by year by not wanting to lose our crown, so we'll have to try even harder next year. But there is also a danger that we're failing to get to the heart of what this is about. And I, for myself, I think the big change is going on in the relationship between broadcasters and suppliers. The power is going from us. It's going to certainly large suppliers, and I find myself attending pitches. I can think of a few in the last couple of months where it's perfectly clear that this pitch has been done to us at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. They've been at Horseferry Road at 4 o'clock. They've been around at the BBC, as it were. And really, it's do you want it or don't you? Here it is. It's a very impressive thing. Now, that's the American system, where if you didn't show your idea to everybody, it would be quite rude. You're expected to show your idea to everybody. The traditional British system is to say, we have, if you like, an informal first option on your idea until we've sat and thought about it for months. I don't think that's a very healthy relationship with suppliers. I respect suppliers here. If they want to play us off against each other in a blind auction or a beauty parade or whatever, that's 100% their right. And I think I may be talking more at the mainstream level, the big glossy project mainstream stuff, high budget stuff. I think with the consolidation of the indie sector, super indies, all the stuff that David Abraham was talking about, McTaggart, the Americans owning everything. Do we feel like a more powerful organisation than NBC Universal in the broader sense of the word? No, we don't. They're bigger than us. And they can treat us as they want to.
Let's hold that thought, because at the end I want us to try and come back and have a sort of bit of a bigger picture conversation about how things might be changing and how we could actually, because I do think it takes two to tango here, and I think it'd be good to talk about how we can, perhaps how things are changing, but how we could change. But meanwhile, can we move on now? So we've talked about the nightmare of email. Just for a bit of light relief, let's look at what happens when you get beyond email and you get into meetings. So this is about commissioner behaviour in meetings. And I have to say, this is one of the better slides, I think, from the broadcaster's point of view, that generally speaking, And I think this is quite, I mean, in a way, I suppose the challenge here is that, how much time you can create for meetings. But it is pretty obvious from this survey that whereas producers find email and that email relationship really frustrating and difficult, by and large, and there are exceptions here, I have to say. I mean, we talked about in the survey about rudeness, and there is a perception that there is a rise in rudeness. But generally speaking, all of you come out pretty well in terms of the quality. So I guess it comes back to that thing about once you get into, and I don't know if we can, whether you actually, any of you feel you want to comment on this, but it does seem to me that actually it does help to get in a room. It does help when you have that sort of relationship. People seem to respond better. And again, ITV does a little bit better, but really these numbers are within a margin of error. I would say I think you all do pretty well.
I mean, from this distance, I can't actually see where ITV is in relation to Sky. Can you see, Peter?
Sky does very well.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, yes, of course it does. I'm disgusted.
Sky does slightly better than ITV. I think this is the one slide where we put this slide in just for you.
Fantastic. Because
you were so upset at not coming top last year. So we thought we'd give you one slide where you come top. However, of course, having a good experience in a meeting does depend on you getting the meeting in the first place. So can we just move to the next slide where the news is not quite so good. So this is last year. Last year we talked about the problem of meetings cancelled at short notice. And as you can see, BBC and Channel 4 last year, first of all, overall, 58% of producers who had a meeting said they had a meeting last year cancelled or unreasonably rescheduled at short notice. Now, at short notice, again, a slightly subjective notion, but we're talking about within a day or so. Pretty bad. And in fact, Danny and Jay both responded to this. Jay said last year, these are pockets of behaviour that we don't want to see happening. And Danny said, we're not good enough on that. You can't excuse or defend it. So shall we look at where we are this year on meetings being cancelled at short notice? So, to be fair to Jay, Channel 4 has got a little bit better.
Yay!
Although still 56% of the producers said they'd had a meeting cancelled at short notice. The BBC, Danny, has actually got significantly worse. 69%, that is more than two-thirds. More than 2 out of 3 of the producers have had. Now, again, a bit like emails, my suspicion is that certain people are repeat offenders or recidivists in this respect. I did actually, since people found out I was chairing this, people have been queuing up to give me their kind of particularly gruesome anecdotes, which included one very senior producer who was in the lobby of New Broadcasting House waiting for a meeting. The assistant of the commissioning editor came down, senior commissioning editor came down and said they were terribly sorry there'd been a diary mix-up, entirely her fault, and the commissioning editor was in a viewing somewhere else and couldn't do the meeting. Unfortunately for her, in the background of New Broadcasting House lobby, the producer saw that commissioning editor with whom she was due to have a meeting sneaking out and into a lift.
Was she one of a twin, or was there anything?
Sorry?
Was she one of a twin, or anything like that? Is there another explanation?
She was a puppet, so you're unable to identify. So just, I mean, obviously that's just one anecdote, but I have to say people have been queuing up to tell me their horror stories. This is really...
Alex, I agree, and I can only apologise for it. If that's got worse, that's really depressing. I do think it's repeat offenders. I do think we're getting better in lots of areas, but I'd be grateful actually if that producer could email me and let me know who that was, because genuinely, I want to know, because I want to be able, there are some individuals who are letting us down, and if they are continuing to do that and being rude and unhelpful in that way, I don't want them on the team. And it can't go on. And the reason I feel apologetic and embarrassed by it in terms of to the indies, but actually I also feel quite angry about that kind of thing for the rest of my commissioning team, because there's a lot of people in my commissioning team behaving really well, and they're also sitting here and seeing that and feeling, that, and it's not fair to them. So I really want to know what's going on.
So here's the thing: if I come to Edinburgh on a train, and the train company delivers me into Edinburgh more than a certain, I think it's 59 minutes or something, it's a cut-off point, I can't remember exactly. If I'm delivered late, I can get a refund. Now, if someone turns up, it's not just, obviously it's particularly difficult for out-of-London producers.
I agree.
But actually even, even for a London producer, you know, a trip to Channel, you know, I used to, you know, wall-to-wall was in Kentish Town. A trip to Channel 4, you know, even if the meeting, even if the meeting was cancelled when I got there, that's still a good 2 hours out of my working day.
Alex,
now, why not have a system
we do have a
of
system.
compensation?
We have
why
a
not?
system.
Why not pay producers every time there's a meeting cancelled? A producer gets 100 quid.
No, I think what's much.
But why not? Why not? I mean,
Because I think we put in place
there's a
something that's
sense
slightly
out
more
there
helpful
that
than that.
unless you guys are incentivized to do something about this behaviour, it will just go on and on and on.
Well, I think there's an alternative to that, which is penalised for getting it wrong. And one of the things that we spent a lot of time on as a team after last year's session is how we can avoid exactly that happening. And you go on the Channel 4 website, you'll find we have a protocol around this. If, because somebody's mother's died, they're not available for a meeting, you as a matter of course will be offered a meeting at the same time with a member of that commissioning team, and the meeting with the original person will be rescheduled as quickly as possible. We do compensate people if they've been brought down and they've wasted money on train fares or whatever, and we're really clear about that. We've even got a protocol around if you're left in reception for longer than 10 minutes, then we will do something about that. So, you know, that is all on the website. It is there, signed up to by my entire commissioning team, and we are working to that. And if there are breaches of that, then I, like Danny, would like to know about it.
So last year, Stuart, you made the point. You asked a very pertinent question. What are the protocol? What are the opportunities available to a producer who is at the receiving end of, I think, what you called crap commissioner behaviour? I mean, that remains an issue, doesn't it? I mean, Liz Warner this morning at the How to Be a Better Indie session, the kind of flip side of this debate, she talked about a complaint, I think, that she made about, I mean, in fact, it wasn't a cancelled meeting, it was a meeting where well, it might as well have been cancelled, a meeting where the commissioners had turned up 45 minutes late and then announced that they didn't have very long because they had to go to lunch. And she complained. And she said this morning, she said, interesting, she said 10 years ago, Liz would not have complained. You know, she would have been too scared to complain. Betty was too small, and she was, you know. So, I mean, do you have, I mean, I don't know who wants to come in on this, each of you, I'm interested in, is there a whistleblower protocol in your broadcasters? If an independent, and how does it work? If an independent producer suffers that kind of behaviour, what do they do? How do they, is there a way in which they can safely make a complaint and be guaranteed that there won't be victimisation?
I mean, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? And, you know, we talked about it last year, that it's an industry that's all based on relationships and trust. And, you know, I'm pleased we don't do that, but actually that's too high for us too, to be honest. And, you know, so what we've said is, email me directly. We've gone on the website, said, as with Jay, we said, these are the values we stand by. If you ask for a meeting, you will automatically get a meeting. You'll get a response, but we don't give a meeting to whoever wants one, but we'll respond. We don't use meetings as briefing vehicles. We use meetings to progress an idea we're keen on. But, you know, we said, email me directly. Since last year, to be honest, Alex, I've had 3 emails. All of them I've followed up with individuals. One of them was from an indie who didn't tell the truth. And when I followed up with the individual, it was really clear this indie hadn't told the truth. I emailed back, said, actually, what you said is not the case. Come on, you've got to play fair. That's the kind of pact. And actually, it turned out it was just a slight exaggeration from someone who was having a bit of a crappy day. So there's a bit of a quid pro quo there. But I actually don't know the way around it. I'd love to know what other people do.
We've got
Ben, can I just ask you, I mean, actually, you know, I mean, you're a small organisation.
Yeah, we've got
you
worse.
Know, but you've got slightly less, but you're still doing
Yeah, we've got worse, but I think,
doing better than everyone else.
When we have it's a really small team, 5 commissioners in total, you know, and they do have a lot of programmes to watch and meetings to do, blah, 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 blah. I'm not making excuses, but I think size does matter. I think what's interesting for me is that people would feel victimised if they were to say to me, you know, I've got a real problem with so-and-so, it's not working. If I have a meeting with, say, Jay, about a future project which is already making something with one of the commissioners, I would say to him...
I'm making a show for you.
No, you will be. One day. To be announced. But I would
You heard
say,
it here first, everybody.
but I would say to that production company, I say, how are you getting on with Emma? How's Emma working on it? Or how are you getting on with Simon? Have you got to go? And that's their time to say, actually, I like him, but I'm finding a bit of this or I'm finding a bit of that. I wouldn't victimise them at all. I want feedback on my commissioners so that I can get the best ideas in and work with the best companies who enjoy working with the channel. Why would I be upset if they were to point out that actually so-and-so is not very good at communication, or they haven't really got very clear briefing on that, or they didn't feel there was very good follow-up on X, Y, and Z. It's the only way that I think this is interesting, but I'm not getting any detail here on what the rudeness is in meetings. What is bad behaviour in meetings? And until I know whether it's people, being insulting or whatever, I'd like a bit more detail so that we can change behaviour. We're going to have to go on,
but what I'm hearing from all of you is you are saying, I think, you are saying, come and we need to know if this bad behaviour is happening, and we will protect you if you come and talk to us.
But our system is slightly different because we did set up last year Stuart as an indie advocate, and we have had people go to Stuart, so we have a kind of parallel thing. If you want to be entirely anonymous, you can go to Stuart and he debriefs me but doesn't tell me who it is. If you want to talk to me, very happy to do that as well. So we have a parallel system.
Okay, we're going to move on. So you've got the meeting. Even if it's a rescheduled meeting, you've had the meeting and you are into development. So the next slide we asked about was about funding of development. So these, basically the question was, these are the number of producers who've been asked to do what were described as pre-production levels of unfunded development, pre-production levels of development without any funding. And right across the board, all the broadcasters. Again, BBC slightly worse than everyone else, but everyone else pretty bad on unfunded development. And I suppose what I wanted to say about this was, David Abraham in his speech last, I suppose this is really a question for Jay, but David talked about, he said, quote unquote, smaller production companies need a special level of protection. Now, the fact of the matter is that this policy of forcing indies to do pre-production levels of development, I don't think anyone is, let's be clear about this. We're talking about, we are talking about the kind of levels of development that you would expect to go into once you had got the gig. We're not talking about, writing it up or the pitch document. This policy actively discriminates against small indies. Big indies can cope with this level of unfunded development. They have big teams. They have, they often have shareholders behind them. The small indies are the ones who are really suffering. So how does this square with, your commitment to supporting small indies?
Well, I think, again, I think this is really tricky for all of us because there are a number of loaded words there and it's quite difficult. What exactly is pre-production on what sort of show? We worked with 367 companies last year. We have a fantastic track record with smaller companies, and I think they wouldn't keep coming back to Channel 4 if they were being disadvantaged all the time. I think the consistency of score there just makes me wonder what exactly we're asking of people. And I think probably from a broadcaster's point of view, our expectation of where a project would need to be at to get green lit might be slightly different from an indies, and maybe that's a dialogue worth having. But there's not a lot of variation between those, which makes me wonder whether there's a misunderstanding about how much work needs to be done to get something over the line.
Danny?
Well, I think the feedback I've had on this, and again, we've had a lot more of this in the factual area, is we're asking for too many versions of treatments before they reach channel controller, and then sometimes channel controllers want more versions. So I've said to those teams in factual, and Emma Swain and I have agreed, 2 versions of a treatment before it goes to channel controller, no more. And I hope that will begin to take some of that, because some of it we're just iterating too much, and we need to get better at that. I would say, I've tried to be quite honest in this session. In the net score overall, and Jay says like different, the net score overall, the BBC came out in the entire process the second best to deal with as a net score. So I'm trying to be honest and say where we need to get better. I want to protect the teams that are doing this really well. And overall, second, the overall thing is not bad, but you can see from what I'm saying that I hope I know where the issues are, which parts of the BBC they're happening in, and what the particular issues are that we need to address.
But just pick up on your point about the number of because I think that is something that would resonate with a lot of producers. I had a conversation with a producer yesterday, again, discovered I was chairing the session, about a project which had been developed with Channel 4. It had been in development for a year and it had still not been discussed with Jay. And the producer, actually my response was to say, well, actually, to be honest, I'd have been out of there. Frankly, I'd have been out of there after a couple of months if it hadn't gone to jail for a couple of months. And so maybe there's a responsibility of independence to be a bit tougher about this.
Yeah, maybe.
But
I think
but
that's
is there not,
refreshing,
and this is really a question for all of you, is this not symptomatic of the fact that we're now in a world where everyone is trying to manage the risk out of the development process entirely? This is about an unhealthy level of risk aversion that producers are being asked to spend their own money and significant amounts of money in order just to get a commission. They're carrying all the risk.
I think you can interpret that in a completely different way, which is to a certain extent, I think money spent in development is a much better use of the money than money spent in post-production trying to rescue something. So I mean, I think in terms
but
of
why not spend Channel 4's money on the development if you believe in the project?
Well, no, okay, fine. But in this context, I think, again, I'd desperately like to understand this a bit more because I think it's quite hard to really gauge how we should respond to that. But we shouldn't be putting people in a situation where they're putting their hands in their pocket. But equally, it's a negotiation to get a commission over the line. And I think it's a reasonable expectation for a broadcaster to have a development in a shape that it can make a decision.
For me, it would be really helpful to get some ideas or some actual examples of what pre-production, unacceptable pre-production levels are to these people, because I think about the money that I spend on casting tapes or recce tapes or whatever, and I'm trying to really rack my brains thinking of anything where I've asked somebody to do something to that level that has clearly upset them without having either a commitment to the programme or funding it myself. And I actually just can't think of an example. So whoever it is out there who has said this, I'd be really interested to know where we're doing something wrong, because unless I'm getting more specific examples, I don't know how I can get better.
Okay. Once again, there are invitations from the people on this panel to come back to them specifically with examples. I think that is a genuine desire for them to understand better what is going to. So, and I do think there is a dialogue here. We'll come on to say. We're going to move on now, because I mean we have a pretty ambitious schedule to get through all of this in an hour. So we're going to move on, and we're going to now in a moment we're going to look at production. And issues around production. But first of all, we've got another piece of VT. This is commissioners and producers talking about the production process. Okay, there's a couple of references in there, a couple of T words in there that I'd like to come back to if we have time when we get to the general discussion at the end. One is trust, where I think some of those comments really represent a bit of a gulf between, on both sides really, a sense in which producers and broadcasters seem to have become, there's an us and them sort of aspect to that which seems quite worrying. And the other is training. And we talked, and this was raised in the production session this morning about the extent to which, is there more that broadcasters could do to train their commissioning editors in really quite basic stuff. But we've got a couple of slides, first of all, just dealing with the finances. Last year, the survey revealed what seems like a pretty shocking statistic, that 58% of 57% of indies had to start production with no agreement in place. So in other words, legally, the producer carrying all of the risk. So we asked the same question this year, and we asked we phrased the question slightly differently, which is why the bar graph is slightly different. So last year, we kind of weeded out people who talked about more than one broadcaster. So we're slightly at 63% this year. So the actual overall number is up. And again, the major offenders are the BBC and Channel 4. Now, last year, Jay, you said this is a transitional period at Channel 4. I don't think that's a statistic we'll see in a year's time. Danny again said that's not good enough at our end. I want to see that come down. Now, again, it seems to me, this is, this is a large versus small indie problem. A large independent, and I started out running a small indie and it ended up being a large indie. So I've seen this from both sides. The fact is that when you are a big indie, particularly if you're part of a group, no one likes starting without a green light, but actually, the chances are you have got a bit of cash in the bank and you can do that without threatening your business. For a small independent, starting a production without a green light is possibly the scariest thing you can ask them to do. Now, again, it seems to me this is not good enough.
Yeah, mean, I think there are two things here. I think it would be fair to say, and I think you can see it in terms of the impact we're now having on air, that we probably had a 2 or 3 year period, and I've been very open about this from the moment I arrived, where the cupboard was bare and we have been running very, very fast. The engine in every aspect of Channel 4 has probably been at risk of overheating. I think we're coming out of that now, and I say that because I can see we're commissioning drama 2 years out, we're commissioning long-term specialist factory with those sorts of lead times. So I would expect to see some improvement on this. There's another piece of behaviour which we've discussed internally as a team, which relates to just a small thing I think we should be able to modify to assist with this, which is often the intention is there to green light, and it's just the commissioning editor is slightly late at feeding it into the business affairs process, and I think that's something we need to do something about swiftly. But I would hope that the change in our fortunes and our lead times will fix this a little bit, and that shift in behaviour will help as well.
Okay. I'm going to move on because we are really running out of time, and I'm anxious that we have an opportunity for a bit of dialogue and a bit of questions. We're now talking about budgets. And one of the questions we asked was, it's a new question we asked this year, which is about how appropriate budgets are in relation to the expectations of the broadcaster. In other words, are you being given the money to do the job? Now, Channel 4, which is taking a bit of a kicking in some of these slides, comes out far and away the best on this slide. Channel 4's budgets seem to be in line, more in line with producers' expectations of what they're being asked to deliver than any other broadcaster. ITV and Sky do pretty well. I think ITV, perhaps unsurprisingly, since they've got quite a lot of money, they've got a big budget, and you would expect that. Sky, I think, because I don't know, sure, but my sense is, you don't necessarily commission a vast range of stuff, but when you commission stuff, you put money into it. Ben, I mean, I have to come to you here. Channel 5, easily the worst in terms of what is perceived to be. I mean, basically, what this is saying is you're asking people to do too much with too little.
Yeah, two things. One, I'd like examples, because we do a whole range of programs, and I'd like to know if there are ones, which they were. It gives me a better idea of where I'm stepping outside the boundaries and where I'm being unreasonable.
Well, we're talking about more than, just to be clear, we're talking more than half of the producers on this survey, and they are the top, they are, I would say, 83 of the top 100. Yeah. More than half of them say that Channel 5 has asked.
Yes, I know, but I need to know what the examples of those programs are. But I will say, not in my defence, that I will push for as much as I can get for my money. I've got less money I've got much smaller budgets, an average 8 o'clock is 80,000, an average 9 o'clock is 120,000, but that doesn't mean to say that I want my expectations to be low. Having said that, while I'll push and push and push, I will always compromise with a dialogue, because it doesn't take much for somebody to come and say, you can't have X, Y, and Z, you can have X and Y, which two out of the three do you want? And I'm always very happy. Well, I'm not happy, it's not the right word, because I'm probably a bit grumpy about it, frankly. But I will always have a discussion about where I have to compromise. I just don't like to compromise. I find this kind of thing slightly unnerving, because I'm unaware that so many people are unhappy with the level of expectation that I'm demanding of them for the money I'm giving them. And unless the production company comes and has a conversation with me and says, look, we really love working with you, or we don't like working with you, or we really want to work with you more on these kind of things, but we really do struggle with X, Y, and Z. Can we find a way forward? How am I supposed to change the culture if I'm not getting the information back? I need more. Ben
has Ben, if you like, we could say Ben has the excuse. He's working on a tight budget. That isn't the case with the BBC, and the BBC is not scoring well here.
Well, we're roughly in the middle. Look, we need to make sure we're competitive. We're under more scrutiny on money than probably all the broadcasters put together. I'm not surprised that we drive very, very hard for value for money. It's going to be even tougher in the next year. We're coming up to license fee settlement. I think the best way we can all do that is the industry helps us make sure we get a decent license fee settlement. But we need to be competitive. But I don't think we're ever going to be at the top of that one, Alex.
Okay. Let's move on. The next question we asked, and there's the last of the slides we're coming to now, was a question about, so you've agreed the budget. The other new question we asked was about producers feeling that they were forced to go over budget because of a lack of clarity or inconsistency in the editorial instructions. Now, what is interesting about this slide for me, well, first of all, 69% of producers said that they had overspent due to unclear or inconsistent editorial advice. It's worth saying, these producers are not saying that they are picking up the bill necessarily. There's no, in some cases, I'm sure you are picking up some or all of this bill. But from your point of view, if you are picking up a significant part of this bill, this is, and interestingly, Jay, you come out really well in terms of the appropriate levels of budgets, and yet your shows, producers still feel, even though they're saying, listen, Channel 4 are better than any other broadcaster at giving us the money we need to make the show, and yet, when it comes to it, Channel 4 are the worst overspending. So you're giving everyone more money,
yeah, but, again,
but you're actually overspending as well. There's a real inefficiency issue here.
Well, I think there are 2 or 3 things going on here. I think on one level, this year alone, we've worked with 74 brand new companies, which nearly many, in terms of the brand new companies, is the total number that ITV work with. So often we're dealing with people who've never worked with Channel 4. That's quite complicated. Often, by the very nature of our remit, we're doing shows that are hybrids or are different that we've never really landed before. And I think inevitably in that, there's going to be complexity in terms of landing that show. So some of those factors will continue to be the case. Also, to your earlier point, 90% of these overspends are picked up by Channel 4. I think we have a pretty extraordinary track record in that respect. But this is the slide that's concerned me most, and we've spent a lot of time talking about it as a team, because at its heart, there is also something important about the clarity of that feedback. And I think there's one thing that I want to take from this year's survey is that we go back and we make sure that what we committed to last year we are delivering on consistently. There is one set of notes, one clear voice from the channel, and we're articulating our vision for that show consistently. And that's something we need to work on. But I think this also disguises some other issues which relate to the weird hybrid that we have. We have a lot of very, very new suppliers and a remit to do things that are going to be difficult to land. So I think that plays into it a little bit as well.
Okay, we are really pushed for time now, and I should say to all of you and to panel members, inevitably we've had to deal with this in the context of this session at a very high level. A lot of the granular detail that lies, but there's a lot of slides we haven't managed to get to. Some of them are published in broadcast this week, but there will be more material. So we are in a moment going to open it up for questions. But first of all, we have one final piece of VT, which is about about how we might move forward. Maybe some slightly more constructive thoughts about going forward. We run to the next VT. Okay. I'm going to take some of the questions. As I say, if you, there's still time. If you, I've had quite a lot of questions here from people in the. One of the questions from the floor is, how much do you do as broadcasters to? I mean, several of you, Ben, I think particularly, has said, well, one of the things is, I'm slightly, I think you said something, I'm slightly bemused by this. I didn't realise there was so much dissatisfaction and whatever. I know ITV you have the producers forum, and I know all of you have kind of, commissioning and sort of pitching sort of forums where you kind of, is there more you could do to develop, to open up the dialogue around these kind of issues? So not just about these are what we'd like to, these are the programs we'd like, but actually open up a more open and honest dialogue with your suppliers about the process, because these are not issues about what you're commissioning. These are issues about the process, and clearly, and as I say, you guys have come on here. I could say, I think there are two sides to this. Maybe producers need to be braver. Maybe they need to be more honest with you. Maybe they're hiding behind the survey. But is there more that you could do, individually or collectively, to open up? Maybe there's something that could come out of the session. Actually, we actually have a proper dialogue. Does anybody want to, Peter?
Well, I think it's good. Yeah, we do a producers forum every year, and what we try to do every year is to sort of improve it every year, because otherwise it'll just get boring. So we kind of, and we do talk a lot about how to commission. I'll be honest, I think almost all my attitude to the role of the commissioner, the nature of the commissioning practice, stemmed from my many, many years as an indie, because I saw it all, and And I don't really like those VTs, by the way, because I think they're just sort of fomenting a kind of sense that we're endlessly bickering at each other. I don't think we are endlessly bickering at each other. But of course, commissioning practice is improvable. And I'm sure we all want to work on improving it, because the end game is to get the best ideas on your channel from the best people, working with the best people. I'm not greatly in favour of kind of, if you like, spying on the commissioners and checking their emails and their email response times. I don't think it's, I really respect the commissioning team. I'm sure everybody else around this table does as well. I think we haven't spoken very much about the role of our business affairs team. I think that's incredibly important, because they are maintaining a really important relationship with suppliers. And so, in ITV's case, I think we've got a really good business affairs team. But I don't want to hear that they're at loggerheads with our suppliers. I want to hear that they're getting on really well with our suppliers, and I think they do. So there's lots of things there, but they all amount to good commissioning practice. I think it's a really important issue we should focus on. This is a bit of a whistle-stop tour of it. I think you've done a very amazing job of getting us to sort of 1 o'clock at all with so much to talk about. It's good for us to get it on the open and talk about it. Let's continue doing so. Whether this form is as enlightening as all that, I don't know.
Can I say, I made the point earlier that producers and suppliers generally need to be braver and stand up. We do have mics in the hall. I have got some, people have been putting questions through on that, but we do have mics in the hall, and it would be really great to see some questions. Do we have some questions actually from the floor? Is anyone? There, we have a question over there. Put your hand up and I will come to you next if there's anyone else.
Sarah Gregson, Director of Business Affairs at Zodiac Media. I was wondering, why not go back to the old-fashioned trust letter if you're behind in the contractual process, which would mean the Indies wouldn't be funding the production of the programmes?
I don't know the answer. Can I just say, by the way, that business about green light, I don't really understand that, because do we mean that people start making things without a green light, as in I'm commissioning your programme, or without fully signed contracts? Well, God, I know when I was in India, we were always making programmes without fully signed contracts. They often weren't signed until the end. But my view when I was in India was, if we've got the green light, the broadcasters do not let you down. Ultimately, they don't say, sorry, we're never going to pay for that programme. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to your question, Sarah. Maybe that's a very good idea.
That's the difference, Peter, because in them days, when we were a boy and a girl, we had the trust letter, and so we were funded, yeah. And that's the point.
Well, it might be a good idea. I don't know.
Any more questions? Sorry.
Hi there, Jake Cantor from Broadcast Magazine. I was just wondering if the panel recognised Peter Fincham's characterisation of the sort of the way the UK market is progressing in terms of commissioning behaviour, becoming more US, producers having more power. So do the panel recognise that, and do they think that's a healthy thing or not?
Do you recognise it? Do you think it's healthy?
Oh, that's quite a big one.
I haven't had any. I don't think I've had any experience of it. It's not big enough.
We've had experience of it. I think it's quite funny in a way, because I think there's something culturally about it that will make it quite difficult for it to take off here. So a big US studio coming in and saying, I'm in to see so-and-so next, and I'm in to see so-and-so next, I think is meant to make you think, well, I better do something, whereas I'm afraid it has slightly the opposite effect on me, which is I think, well, off you go then. So, I wonder a tiny bit whether there's something just quite self-deprecating about Britain that will make it quite difficult for that to ignite.
I mean, we've had experience quite recently, Peter and I, on something that we knew was being pitched to both of us. We did meetings on. In the end, neither of us got it. Yeah. And a big American supplier got it instead of drama. So I think that's happening. I don't really mind. I think as long as people are transparent about what they're doing, that's fine.
I wouldn't use, I don't know where this idea that American somehow equals uncreative and bad. I know that's not the point you're making, Jake, but the McTaggart yesterday, I was a bit... Adam McDonald made the point today that since when were American producers uncreative? Where's this come from? You know what I mean? It's a kind of a little theme that started to develop. I love dealing with American studios, American producers, and as well as British ones.
But
it's a small point.
This comes through. Stephen Lambert came to an away day thing that we did and talked about his experience in India, and he pointed out how opposite the systems were, where in America, you're expected to show every idea to everybody. It would be rude not to, and they know that you're showing them on the same day, and then do you want them or do you not? Whereas the UK system is almost the opposite, where a broadcaster sort of thinks, oh, you're talking to me, you're only talking to me. I'm not saying which is better. I'm saying I wouldn't be surprised with the consolidation in the sector and more American ownership of big indies to see more of the former coming in. And it's still quite unusual, but it's definitely on the rise as I see it.
The Festival app allows you to ask questions. It also allows other people to rate the questions. So our top rated question, specifically for Danny and Jay, is how much personal responsibility do you take for, I mean, do you both regard the buck as stopping with you in terms of dealing with these? And are we going to see things getting better next year?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the nature of leadership, isn't it? I mean, I run a team who, frankly, I can see a lot of them here are bored senseless with me going on about this. I mean, a lot of it is behavioural stuff around politeness and courtesy, which I feel really strongly about. So, yes, ultimately, the buck stops with us, which is why I'm glad that we've seen some improvement, I suppose.
But if it's the case that, I mean, Peter says well, we don't want to, and I understand exactly what you're saying about, you know, an uneasiness about spying on individuals and sort of, you know, that, I mean, I get that. On the other hand, if it's the case that there are a small number, a relatively small number of repeat offenders, bad apples in here that are spoiling the overall stats, then how do you deal with that without having a system internally for identifying miscreants? I mean, how do you, my sense is that, you know, and that, you know, having, you know, a long experience of this, that there are lots of fantastic commissioning editors and lots of fantastic relationships, but there are some who, frankly, and it's not about age, it's not about seniority, it's not about even about experience. There are some people who, frankly, should not be in the job, in my opinion. And so how are you going to identify those people? I mean, Danny says, I don't want these people on my team. You know, they're not helpful. How are you going to root them out?
Well, I think the question is the right question, and I think you have to take personal responsibility for it overall. The way I'm going to do it, because I think we've got a particular problem in some areas to say, is I'm going to ask for monthly reports at the moment on how well these teams are doing. And that will give me a really clear picture because I don't want them damaging our overall reputation. I think the BBC is incredibly strong on screen at the moment. We're doing really well. We're up in share and all those things. I want our team's reputation across the board to be as strong as that. We're not doing terribly. We're not the best. We're not the worst. We come out second overall in that net score for the whole process. But in some areas, we're not doing well enough. I take overall responsibility for that, and I'm going to be looking really, really carefully about where exactly these problems are and what we do about them.
Okay. I think that's a pretty good moment to end. We're out of time. I'd like to genuinely thank, I think it's a pretty tough gig, this, to come up here and be confronted with these slides. I'd like to thank all of our panellists, Danny Cohen, Peter Fincham, Jay Hunt, Ben Frow, Stuart Murphy, for taking part. I'd also like to thank SPA Future Thinking, who carried out the survey and broadcast, and our sponsor, Scripps Networks. As I said before, we couldn't cover all of the issues raised here, and we've only, I think it's fair to say, in some cases, we've only managed to scratch the surface of some of those issues. But broadcasts are picking up where we've left off. The results have been made public, and you can see those kind of views. Thank you all very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of the festival.